podcast focuses on the many challenges facing education and how different approaches and innovations are needed to meet those challenges.
Join co-hosts Matt Jessop and Kingsley as they have discussions with innovative educators, business leaders, policymakers, and other stakeholders, and guests looking at transforming the future of education.
Morning. Thank you for joining us, Jonny. I'm going to try and give you an intro here. So you, I think you were Angel Investor of the Year in 2024, is that right?
I was. I've gone off a cliff.
You are CEO of Capital Enterprise, which I think is a not-for-profit venture capital firm, is that right? But I know, putting all the names and things to one side, you are heavily involved with most startup economies or environments, whether it's Liverpool, Manchester, the Turing ones, things like that. You seem to be the focal point of many of them. The best bit I think about you is that a Manchester event, I watched you tell a Manchester audience that the last time you were there was when Liverpool won 7-0, and I was amused. The rest of the audience, not so much as I recall. But I mean, you seem you've been in it for years, obviously. So, well, I mean, from your perspective, does the UK and does England support entrepreneurship in the UK enough? And what could be done to strengthen the sector? That's the opening question. Bam.
That's a big question. You've teed me up. Yeah, nice one. It's really thanks for having me. It's lovely to be on here. Yeah, I mean, in answer to your question, yeah. So a capital enterprise, we're a not-for-profit. Got a sort of the A team of innovators, I like to think of it. We work with corporate clients, government, central and local government departments to solve kind of grand innovation challenges using new startups. So we do like a lot of hack days, short, medium, and long-term programs all over the country. Now, yeah, it's a really difficult question to ask. I mean, in one sense, yeah. I think sometimes people think that I am trying to be negative and not remotely. Like, I'm Team UK. I want us to win, but we won't win if we restrict the range of debate to only talking about the good things. And you know, I understand the position that politicians and civil servants and local economic development people are in. You're never going to put bad stuff in a press release, right? And I mean, we've just seen over the past 9 months what happens if you talk down the economy, for example. But I do think there's certainly things that could be done to make the situation better. All in all, I mean, look, the UK is still a great country. I rant a lot about the fact that we have the most expensive industrial electricity prices in the world, but at the same time, at least we're not in a civil war, right? There's countries where you can't stop at the traffic lights. There's countries where your food supply is scarce. Yeah. So I think it's all about context. What I would say is that specifically around business, the economy, it is my personal opinion from the evidence available to me that we are kind of riding on the coattails of the noughties and to some degree, especially in tech, the 2010s. We are not adapting, and neither is most of Western Europe, to the reality of the kind of new, some people would call it multipolar, but I would call it partially deglobalized world. And I think that, and I try to keep ideology and political dogma out of it, but I don't see a single political party in operation that has exactly the what I think are the answers to fix some of these problems.
Jonny, that's a really interesting kind of maybe a foundation for a conversation to go off through some different avenues, but we come from the focus on the education space, but like all these things, the driver is the future economy, how we grow, skills that feed into it. So one of the hats I wear is I sit on the combined mayoral authority for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, one of the, over the last few years, the government's mayoral authorities that you'll be very familiar with in your region. And one of the challenges since we've had a change of government has been about putting together those economic and growth plans for all the regions. But there seems to be, whilst there's a will, You talked about that difference of pace, and I see what's happening in many American states, and I see Boulder in Colorado and what's happening in Boston and other regions. Their ability to adapt to pace of change seems much more significant than perhaps our incremental improvements on areas that have historically been strong. Is that something that you're seeing from your experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. So I see that in multiple ways. So I see it in my own investment portfolio. I see the companies that I've supported that work in America, or that are mainly USA based, expand quicker than those that are London based typically. And the ones that are London based expand and grow and are successful quicker than the ones that are based in the North. That is, I mean, it's not a huge data set, but it's a clear trend amongst the companies I've invested in. I don't buy this idea that one of the things about me is and I don't do this to be obstinate or disruptive in any way, but I do. Maybe it's the kind of political economy stuff that I've read, the kind of school of economic thought that I predominantly studied throughout university. But I do question the kind of orthodoxy about what we do. And we still in Europe are in this sort of centre-left, centre-right, liberal orthodoxy as to how things are done. And so part of that orthodoxy, I think, and something that you didn't really hear pre-90s, so I'm told, so I was born in 92, but that is becoming a common trope over the past 2 decades is, well, Americans are just more entrepreneurial, right? If your business fails in America, they'll say, hey, have another go, man. Whereas if that happens in the UK, you're going to lose your house, no one's going to talk to you, and HMRC is probably going to chase you down. There's probably some elements of truth to that, in that people are probably familiar with an entrepreneur in their life that has gone through that experience. But I don't believe that that is necessarily a cultural or genetic or sort of ethnicity specific trait. I think that that is actually explained by policy. And the problem is, policy is very boring to most people, but policy is actually what dictates the day-to-day sort of human, corporate, cultural, social environment that we as individuals interact with, whether that is in a kind of a home, residential, family setting, as an individual, as a group, or in a workplace or as an entrepreneur. And so there are normally quite boring policy reasons behind this. And I'm one of the reasons I'm still optimistic, despite things looking a bit glum at the minute, is that there are very qualified people, much more capable and learned people than myself, who are working on this. So people at Look for Growth Coalition, which is kind of a pressure group that's trying to unclog the challenges that we've got around planning, education, energy that are holding back entrepreneurship and business growth. A lot of the think tanks now, despite sitting on opposite ends of the political spectrum, there's a lot of think tanks that are starting to converge on a bit of a consensus about we need to reform the Town and Country Planning Act. We need to change how we approach decarbonisation of the grid. The challenge is, I think, and again, I'm politically homeless, so I'm not foaming at the mouth to see the end of a political kind of orthodoxy. But I do feel that we are coming to the end of this sort of centre-left, centre-right, the blob kind of era. But I think what we're experiencing is the teething pain of it clinging on for dear life. Now, I don't know what's going to replace that, and I'm not going to necessarily say that what replaces it straight away is going to instantly be better. But I think what needs to happen is the range of acceptable debate, the Overton window, needs to expand, because I'm not a climate denier, right? I want clean rivers. I want a biodiverse environment. I care about, the planet. But I would contend, and I think there's a lot of evidence to say that the way that we are approaching our energy policy right now is not good for the planet, and it's not good for us in terms of our pockets either. So now, and it's just interesting because saying that maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, you would be castigated and ostracized as well, you must be a far right or a far left, you must be on the fringes. But it's kind of, you can see it's become more mainstream.
You might still be, but there is a really good debate there: sustainability versus innovation and growth. That It often feels like it's a zero-sum game; it's one or t'other, rather than finding that sweet spot.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't believe it's a zero-sum. I think there's actually enormous commercial viability for more sensible solutions to protect our environment and decarbonize our grid. But I think because we're so centralized as a society, what Ed Miliband says goes right now, and he's sticking to his plan, and that's his prerogative. He was elected. That's the whole point of democracy, right? Whether you like it or not, like the most popular person by votes wins. But I think there has to be some kind of adjustment, because I do fear for a lot of our remaining manufacturing industries, particularly the chemicals and automotive clusters that we've got around the Northwest and the Midlands, if we continue on the current trajectory.
Wow. I always do these recordings, and I'm thinking I'm really not clever enough to understand the bigger picture sometimes, so it's fascinating hearing from Jonny. But I find there's a strong similarity between entrepreneurship and education. But I had a question prepared, but what you just mentioned about London, if you've got a company in London, it grows faster, it's just a fact, than a company in the Northwest. And Alan and I have talked about education. I mean, school system in London and the education, networks, environments in London are a different world to the ones up in Cumbria.
Yeah.
And there's almost like a disconnect. And something that always strikes me is that you were heavily involved with the Liverpool startup economy, which is now ticking along quite nicely. You've got the Baltic Ventures and things like that. Manchester's got Turing. How are we missing out on huge regions of the country like Cumbria and like the Northeast without a rural sort of hub as well as these city-based hubs? Would that be something you'd be comment on?
Disclaimer, as with a lot of my views, strong opinions, very loosely held. In the space of a year, can do 90-degree turns in a lot of this, because I actively seek out stuff that challenges my kind of current position on a lot of these things, and the result of that is that I don't think I'm as entrenched as a lot of people. The challenge that we have in the UK, particularly rural regions, let's look at Liverpool, right? That's a perfect example. Liverpool was famously the second city of the empire. And if you look around Liverpool as a city, it was built for an urban population of in excess of 1 million people. And we suffered huge, obviously, decline post-Second World War, and with containerization of the Docklands and with trade shifting to Europe rather than the USA being our predominant trading partner. And the result of that is that Liverpool's population hit a kind of a nadir of, I think in the 70s, of just about 400,000 people. I think we've crawled back up steadily to about 560. But we're at kind of half the population of what the city was originally built for. And there are lots of areas of the UK that have suffered a population decline as people have urbanized and gone towards cities to pursue employment. Young people want nightlife, they want things to do, they want to be where there's a bit of a buzz. And so that's had quite an adverse effect on a lot of towns and more rural areas. You see this in Italy, right? You can buy a house for €1 in Tuscany. Now it's a big reconstruction project, and you'd need to fit cables and stuff, but there's these entire villages which are just very rural, kind of agricultural areas, and they're an hour away from a major city, and that's where the young people tend to want to go. I don't think in the short term that you can arrest these changes, because culturally driven changes tend to be very powerful individual and group motivators in terms of psychology. But I also do believe that you can cushion the blow, right? Let's take a really controversial topic, right? So Margaret Thatcher, a very divisive figure, basically dependent on what part of the country you come from and what your political persuasion is. There's very few people who kind of say she was okay. Everyone either thinks that she was, kind of a hero, or people strongly dislike her. And I understand both sides. If Thatcher had have done what she did, but it was accompanied by strong social reforms to make sure that anyone who was in an area where a pit or a mine had closed was offered completely state-funded retraining, and that housing was of a good quality, and that jobs were redistributed to these areas, she probably would have been much more universally liked. Obviously, that never happened. I think we're going by stealth through a second Thatcherization right now. You see this with Grangemouth, with Port Talbot, and again, not to pick on the kind of climate agenda, but I don't see adequate evidence right now that the steel mill workers and heavy industry workers are being appropriately retrained on predominantly electronics and kind of plastic fabrication involved in wind turbine construction, installation, and operation. And so I actually think I would posit that in 30, 40, 50 years, the AQA kind of history or sociology exam paper might say, why did the green reforms, the net zero reforms of the 2020s fail? And, part of the mark scheme will be the student must elaborate on the sort of geographic distribution of job closures, industry closures, and the failure to materialize some new jobs. It's these rural areas. It's kind of like a Matthew effect. To those who have very little, everything will be taken. For those who already have abundance, everything will be given. And again, it's kind of weird because as a geographer by background, I think about a lot of the kind of quite strange natural phenomenon like dynamic equilibrium, ephemeral kind of weather or geomorphological events, the sort of evolution of rivers, basins, and glaciers. And there are so many of these kind of systems that operate in a kind of a positive feedback, counterintuitive fashion, or at least it seems counterintuitive, and that fundamentally cause the transition to a different kind of environment or a different kind of thing. I think right now we're probably at the point where I don't want to say there's no hope for rural areas, but I think fundamentally a new model of economic development and society is needed. And I also think that we're also approaching the point where the pendulum will tip back slightly, because the kind of core cities, London, Birmingham, and Manchester, they I don't think I'm speaking out of turn by saying that the social kind of problems, the aesthetic decay, the decline of beautiful architecture, the rise of antisocial behavior, mental health issues, it focuses quite strongly around these sorts of cities, and in particular certain areas within them where you've got a concentration of these issues that are caused by wider access or lack of access to things like jobs, good services, and social cohesion. So not to sound like a Dr. Doom, but these things will sort themselves out, right? And you see this in the economy with recessions. We're all worried about a recession, right? And Rachel Reeves is teetering on the brink of a recession. The recession is not the problem. The recession is the cure, right? Not to be crass, but it's a bit like having cancer, right? The recession is chemo. It is the treatment, but nobody wants to be in the body while it's going through chemo because it's deeply unpleasant, right? The recession is the forced rebalancing of economic sort of power, and you can say the same about things like civil unrest and other kind of nasties that we tend to look down on in our society.
Wow, yeah.
There's some interesting strands there, Jonny. I think, depending on where you sit in that ecosystem, that people's perspectives of economic cycles and impacts obviously has quite different bearings, but understanding the interconnected relationship of that ecosystem, I think, is absolutely a fundamental. Within the context of our area, perhaps our broader sphere of influence for this podcast, we're often talking about this alignment with what's happening in education is similar to what's happening in the change in the workplace, the need for different organizations, different skills, technologies, advancing to align with what we want. How do you apply the same kind of thought process when you're looking at startups or scale-ups that are looking for perhaps support from yourself or people within your team? What are the measures you look at when you're trying to forward look at the sustainability in the economic sense, perhaps more than anything else, about projects? How do you crystal ball gaze and look for the sort of key indicators?
Every time I do a LinkedIn post or a podcast in particular, my follow account drops quite dramatically, and I get usually some angry messages. And I think sometimes people don't hear what I'm saying, or they hear what they want to hear. So I always feel like I have to preface everything with kind of caveats and disclaimers. And now I work for a kind of an innovation agency, not for profit, that solves corporate, social, governmental problems using startups. and in doing so supports these high growth startups that are very technology oriented. No program, no startup, no business is a substitute for good housing, energy, health, immigration, and education policy. But I do see trends in terms of those that are successful and those that are not. The first thing I always say is, and I say this as someone who, like Matt pointed out at the start, I do a lot of stuff in the ecosystem, and I kind of feel that maybe that word's a bit overused. Like, there are certain things where it takes a village to raise a child, right? And if you are doing things, particularly in the domain of deep tech, of biomed, of manufacturing, you need, a professional services network, you need property, you need a lot of partners typically to make things happen. But there's a lot of businesses, particularly in like digital, like SaaS apps and stuff like that, where you can just build. You don't need permission. You don't need a network. You don't need to go to an awards event. You don't need to come to Startup Kind of Liverpool. You don't need to go to Liverpool Slushed. None of these things are going to guarantee you success. And I always feel like it's really important to clarify that to people. I host my meetups and, pizza and beers and pitch nights, and I host Liverpool Slushed because it's fun, right? And I think it's nice to get together with people once a year in that kind of setting to swap ideas, reflect on what you've done for the year, and let your hair down for a bit and have engaging debates and conversations, right? Now, I mean, the caveat to this is, if you're a startup and you get on Y Combinator or Entrepreneur First or, somewhere quite prestigious like Founders Factory, or maybe you get backing from Project Europe, which is just launched, which whole other can of worms we can talk about there. You probably have a higher chance of success because there are certain brands like those ones I've just mentioned that have a natural kind of momentum behind them and that give you access to a network of people with very deep pockets and with a lot of quite tried and tested ideas and with the insights and experience to help guide you towards success. But it's still not a guarantee of success. I know plenty of entrepreneurs who've had like 8-figure exits that they've not engaged with any programs, they've not done an accelerator, they didn't go to a local angel network, they didn't, they've done things their own way. There are just many kind of unknown factors, to quote Donald Rumsfeld. Well, that didn't turn out so well, but there are many unknown factors in terms of what causes success. To touch on your point about regional success and things like that, I mean, there is no such thing as a funding gap. People talk about this funding gap. What they're referring to is a distribution in the number of deals and the amount of money that goes into London area companies versus other areas. That investment, it's private investment. That is a natural free market. There is a good established free market that is efficient for investment in the UK. It's quite different when it comes to public money and you look at the disparities and things like transport spending. But where there's a healthy private market, it doesn't need tweaking. And I'm actually, in the politest possible terms, like I've got no beef with anyone who works there, but I would push back against a lot of the kind of orthodox thinking that is common at the British Business Bank and at some of like the kind of regional efforts about this stuff. What there is an infrastructure gap, and it's infrastructure in terms of, if I look at the founders that I've supported who've still been really successful in Liverpool, they are former teachers, they have been doctors and nurses, they have come from other corporate office jobs. They have not been sort of elite university graduates, they have not been former management consultants at McKinsey or BCG, they've not been Big Four kind of accountants, they've not been investment bankers. Because a lot of that elite infrastructure is concentrated in the Southeast, you see these disparities that continue. The way to fix these things is to foster better innovation in the North. No fund, no board, no pick your group by gender, race, ethnicity, whatever subsector you want to focus on. No single initiative, unfortunately, is going to fix that. And I'm not decrying any of the things that exist in that space, but these problems are infrastructural and they are fixed, again, by policy. And nobody votes at the ballot box for we're going to improve the infrastructure of spin-outs and deep tech research translation into commercialization in the Northeast. People don't vote about that. People vote based on question time, based on the big five issues, and things like that. I would say the number one thing with entrepreneurs, no matter where they come from, is ability to execute quickly. This is why it's so tough working with people sometimes who've come through edtech and they've got that teacher mentality. They fail fast is not a thing in education. You can't fail fast when it comes to young people's outcomes, because so many of those outcomes depict their future success and health and life expectancy and stuff. So there can be quite a transition for a lot of entrepreneurs. What I would say as well is not everyone needs to be this Silicon Valley tech bro unicorn founder. I think there's a little bit of fetishization, the whole Gary V, the hustle porn thing, and I don't do that, right? I don't like that. I'm sure Gary V is a great person, probably love to have a beer with him and talk about shoes and stuff, but I do not follow that stuff. Same with like the real deep tech people, you think they get up at 4 a.m., they worship Elon Musk, that kind of thing. Like, anyone can be more entrepreneurial. Not everyone can be a unicorn founder. Not everyone can go raise VC. It's a very specific subset, like very specific business model and market dynamics and unit economics. But absolutely everybody can be a little bit more entrepreneurial. And I think a lot of people could run a lifestyle business or a small company that, especially in this environment, gives them more money, more life opportunity, and probably a better sort of quality of life than what a lot of the corporate or SME or existing jobs out there could do.
It's interesting listening, because we work with the Prince's Trust, which I think is now the King's Trust. Not quite sure where the branding is there. But one of the modules that we do is entrepreneurship, which is not national curriculum. It sort of touches on little bits of national curriculum, but the kids love it. And some of the kids will make a good few £100 at a local fair selling bird boxes and create their own websites and things. But the Prince's Trust has now withdrawn from rural areas to focus on, and I'm not saying it's not a good idea, not much needed, on the deprivation and the issues in Manchester and Birmingham and London, because they're off the chart, so they have to focus somewhere. That's absolutely fine. EdTech, can we ask about EdTech, Jonny, then? Because I'm just a simple folk in education. You're leading entrepreneurial ecosystems here and there. Al is, you'll never say it, but he's ridiculously well known in EdTech because he's very successful as a businessman as well, and he's very knowledgeable. I'm a bit cynical about most EdTech companies, in that I think a lot of them, and certainly at Bet Show this year, AI driven was a label I saw everywhere, and I just thought a lot of the time, well, that's nonsense. But we as a school, we use a lot of EdTech, but we don't actually pay for much. But then you see these companies in marketing brands that schools will sign up to. In terms of the quality of EdTech companies out there, whether they're big company led or teacher led and things like that, how many of them do you actually feel are meeting the needs of educators and pupils, and how many of them are just there to make the money?
Well,
which is their job, so I get it.
Yeah, this is where now I get a wave of unfollows from people who work in edtech. Now I am also a skeptic, but I have to be skeptical about everything. I didn't choose to kind of come. I think I naturally fell into this industry because I am super skeptical of everything. I'm extremely skeptical about AI. I've tried thousands of AI tools. I can think of 3 that are genuinely useful, and that's because, not to big myself up, my writing style, my writing ability, my natural strengths in this life, are around research, articulating ideas, writing, those sort of things. I just don't get a lot of time to do it anymore. I think as with everything, 98% of everything is basically a scam. Not a scam in the fraudulent sense, but it's a scam in that it is not really solving a problem. It's more of a vitamin than a painkiller, right? It's what we teach in incubators: be a painkiller, not a vitamin. The problem, as with anything else, is also adoption, right? The challenge with edtech that makes a lot of investors nervous in the UK is you are selling, and again, I'm generalizing massively here, so I don't want to upset anyone. You are selling to a buyer that is different usually to the end user. So if you are selling a platform or a product or tool that is going to be used by a teacher or pupils, the school business manager stands in a way. School business managers generally have not done anything else other than be a school business manager. The buying cycles are difficult. It's a budget constrained market because it's dependent on what government says goes and what, like nowadays, academy trusts say goes. It just has a lot of dynamics that make it challenging, and a lot of people get into it for good reasons. They want to make a positive impact and stuff, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and there is a big graveyard of ed tech companies out there that got lots of initial traction, won some grants, but just never quite got embedded. I saw a thing the other day. There was a thing on Industry 5.0, and I was like, "Wow, what the hell is Industry 5.0?" Because when in my younger days, I worked on programs in Liverpool that were around Industry 4.0, and Industry 4.0 is robotics, automation, connected devices, and the supply chain. Apparently 5 is all about like mass customization, so kind of producing that volume, but being able to make everything different, right? So I'm not convinced personally. The issue we've got is most of our manufacturing base are not even on Industry 3.0. Our health service still uses pages. Half the manufacturers I know use fax machines. They don't know anything about like the apprenticeship levy. There's all this stuff out there. Government, again, loves to talk about the cutting edge, the R&D. We're going to do this AI thing. It's going to be generative AI. The savings that we could just get by getting people off Windows XP in most places and onto something a bit newer would be profound.
It's the same in education, isn't it? We're looking at all these like schemes for AI for schools, but at no point have they addressed the actual infrastructure. So the schools around the country without a wireless network, without a decent internet connection, without the CPD. So AI is of no use until you get that sorted. Get the basics right first.
And my other gripe as well is that people in all aspects of life, what is stereotypically, socially, culturally the thing when we see a guy having a midlife crisis? What's he done? He's gone and bought a sports car, right? People will use glossy new things to paper over the failure that they are encountering in the fundamentals. And my worry is that the national curriculum drastically needs reform, but I worry that a lot of this AI and new types of learning, problem-based learning, is being used to paper over the fact that we increasingly have people concentrated in some of these inner city areas who have very, very low levels of reading, writing, speaking, listening, arithmetic, and basic scientific knowledge. And one should not be a substitute for the other.
Jonny, as an EdTech CEO and chair of the BESA, British Education Suppliers Association's EdTech group, I want to disagree with you, but I'm not going to, because your comments when it comes to curriculum and papering over the cracks and stuff, Matt and I absolutely would resonate and agree with you on that. I would argue that AI is a bit of a distraction, but has been an amplifier for us to reflect on the role of technology within education. It's had the same conversation in business as well, and depending on what you try to do, that might be more transformative than others. But it has revisited that sense of, is technology here to help? In the same way as we see in most schools in the early stages, technology's main focus has been, how do we reduce staff workload? That's where it started, the same way as its productivity in other areas. Now, I would push back and say that, in the edtech space and knowing how respected it is, the UK is around the world, probably 90% of it isn't smoke and mirrors. There's probably a bit more substance behind it. However, I do support the view that just because a tool is capable of doing the task it was intended for, it doesn't make it right for you. And often it's the application or the use of something where it's just not adding value. And that's where we kind of see this challenge, which is, where's the purpose? Where's the why? And I'm drawn to your approach because I like the disruptive challenge, which is, just because we say it's good, is it good? We know what we're doing and when we're doing it, but why are we doing it in this context? And that very much is a quote that I've used as well, the Donald Rumsfeld. It's not the known knowns or the known unknowns, it's the unknown unknowns. Until we figure that out, we don't know what we're missing.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, fundamentally, you can't repeal technology, to quote Eric Schmidt from Google. I think it's good that universities, other educational institutions are adapting to this era of generative AI. I think it absolutely can be used. There was a thing in the FT the other day that had some quite alarming charts around, sort of coinciding with smartphones, like 07, 08, the first iPhone, and things like attention spans, various other sort of psychological mental disorders around anxiety and stuff. And I think it goes a bit deeper than just people comparing themselves on social media. I think there was a research paper that was quite widely cited. Now, if this has been debunked, I'll have to fully retreat on this argument. But it did highlight that some of the traditional creative problem-solving skills that people traditionally had, so like academic referencing, right, going through a book, properly referencing something for a university piece, the kind of efficacy and ability of people to do that progressively declined once Google came about. And then you see another sort of steep decline when people go from kind of laptop or home computer based Googling to generative AI. And I think there's a worry that actually some of these circuits inside us that help us to figure out like problems that we would normally put under kind of like an IQ test style logic sequence are not being exercised, like, you know, in the context of like a muscle being worked in the gym, because people can now, you know, now we've got this chat interface into things. It's speeding stuff up, but you know, are we a bit like we've nationally lost the ability to manufacture things? Are we outsourcing something that might come back to bite us in a decade or two's time? And I guess, I mean, I'm not a Luddite, right? Like, I'm very much pro all these things, but I just think we need to think about that adoption and also think about the counterbalance to how we potentially mitigate some of the side effects that we're probably not aware of yet.
Short-term gain for long-term pain, basically.
Potentially. I mean, I think it's undeniable. Google's probably added a lot of GDP to the planet, right? And that's probably makes sense. It's a positive deal. It's a positive trade-off. But it's always good to know just what you're signing up to.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of analogy here. These things all have a habit of coming full circle. I look in our region, and within my region where I have a role, you know, Cambridge is a bit of a beacon around the world for scientific discovery and research. But actually, all the measures are about, we want to grow our EBIT, our economic output for each region. And actually, Cambridge's has been quite slow. I mean, it's small percentages of a big thing in terms of growth. And we look at all of the strategic planning around economic growth, and there's often a disconnect, which is actually we need to build the skills train first to actually fill the labour market stats. What do companies want in order to come and move in your area? And that seems to have almost been dismissed with the idea, well, now it's hybrid. People work anywhere in the world. You can recruit your workforce. But for UK PLC, it kind of feels to me that we don't put enough of connecting the dots between the skills acquisition. That let's make sure we value those human skills that you refer to, Jonny, more than just delegating everything to a computer because it's a quick, short fix. That for me kind of seems one of the disconnects, along with Matt's point, which is clearly there are people who are there to support, nurture growth of businesses and provide resources and funds, but it's the network being greater than the node. Certain parts of the country, people don't have enough Johnnies or other people in their phone book to know where to go to access that kind of network that supports all the different strands of business growth, because cash is but one channel. And there's probably more important ones in terms of who you access that will help you grow through your business. I've covered a few points there, but it feels to me like they're interwoven.
These they absolutely are. I spend a lot of time right now. I teach on quite a few webinars across our programs, and I do a bit of a why macroeconomics is important for founders 101. And although we've experienced quite a big downturn in terms of deal volume and deal size in the UK, other markets are booming, right? And being able to speak English from a young age is a gift. It's a hack, right? It's effectively like a life cheat. And I just say to founders all the time, like, what is stopping you from, if not traveling somewhere, like getting on a Zoom with people from somewhere else? You should absolutely be thinking about raising investment or selling to customers in the USA, in Australia, in the Middle East, in the Far East, you know, in these other markets. The challenge with a lot of founders, particularly up north and away from these kind of areas of great infrastructure, they have linear thinking. Linear thinking is great for a lifestyle business and SME, but if you want venture scale companies, then you need venture scale thinking. And venture scale thinking means power laws, it means exponentials, it means maintaining rates of growth that a lot of people up here don't think are possible. Again, these things are easily fixed over a longer time horizon, which is why I remain optimistic.
Can I ask, conscious of time now, Al, but one final question. Is there anything in the emerging technology world that you think education should be aware of that it isn't aware of? I mean, I keep hearing AI agents being mentioned this year, and I'm still not fully on board with them or fully knowledgeable about them. But anything else you think's coming out of the woodwork or the metalwork or whatever it is now?
Well, I think eventually we're going to get to a point where there's going to have to be some kind of education reform, and I don't know what that will look like. I know, we've had UTCs, things like that. Some worked, some didn't work. I'm sure there'll be kind of postmortems of the ones that didn't work, and there'll be what is best practice for the ones that did work. I think if things are going well and everything's functioning, our skills, our education kind of sector should follow where the economy is going. I should normally aim to kind of equip people, in time for when they enter the workforce. There's always going to be a need to have your traditional sort of big three subjects and probably a bit of history and geography on top, because why not? The humanities give life meaning. But I actually think increasingly we are moving away from the world of bits. I'm not one of these people that's going to say software developers are obsolete. That's not true. But if you think back to the early noughties, you might pay £1,000 for a website for your business. You would go to a web agency, they were a thing. They don't exist anymore, or basically don't exist. Now they have to build fully integrated mobile apps, more complex pieces of software, because you can just go on Wix or Squarespace and for 29 quid, bam, 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 you can drag and drop.
I would just jump back there, Johnny, and just say, I wonder how many schools in the UK are still paying £1,000 to £2,000 for their school website.
Most, sadly.
Pick a template, pick a colour, send us information, and that's an annual subscription. And you think, it's so far behind what you're just talking about there, Johnny. Sorry to interrupt. But...
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made from people who aren't aware of what's really out there, and that's that's the unfortunate side of things. But I actually think we're heading back in the investment world into the world of atoms. A lot of I wouldn't say I admire. I'm particularly interested in some of the kind of political and philosophical ideas that drive a lot of the great investors out there, like the Warren Buffetts, the Peter Thiels, some of the the Balaji Srinivasans of the world. And 10, 15 years ago, they were talking about we're going to go back to physical businesses, and everyone was like, no, that's crazy. We're in the middle of a SaaS boom. Everything's web platforms. Everything is software. Everything is bits, not atoms. And actually what we've seen now, driven by geopolitics, driven by conflict, driven by other kind of factors in supply chains and global politics, etc., we are going back to a world of innovation in atoms. And it's become easier to innovate in atoms. A lot of the innovation in the digital world has become commoditized by AI agents. It's very easy to get mock-ups or to get an MVP built now for less than a couple of £1,000. I mean, I've been building apps for the past couple of months that I'm trying to roll out internally within our organization to speed up workflows, and I am not a particularly technical person, and some of them are working with some efficacy. So I think actually we're probably going to begin to value electronics engineers, nuclear engineers, mechanical engineers a lot more again. But those roles will be kind of revitalized, and a big part of doing those roles will also be kind of a portion or segment of understanding how to use a kind of a control interface, some degree of software engineering to control co-pilots, AI agents, but also physical robotics co-pilots, or cobotics as some people will try and call them. So I see us going much more back to that. Problem is, I see the UK right now lagging behind other economies, Western Europe lagging behind other economies in doing this, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, and that's mirrored, whether it's the education space or the corporate space, that we tend to look at legislation at how to protect rather than how to enable and innovate. And we tend to therefore become a throttle that other countries have been quicker on the pace for. Jonny, we could go on talking for hours, and I'm really grateful you've joined us and shared your insights. You obviously share your insights and support and nurture in lots of ways online. People listening to this who think, I'd like to learn a bit more and see whether I can get some insights, where would be the best place for people to head to find out more?
I mean, I do have a website, startographer.com. It's kind of a loose amalgamation of startup geographer. I've toyed with various things over the years. At one point, I was thinking about kind of trying to do a docu-series on like founders in the UK, that sort of stuff, but life's taken me on other places. You can follow me on LinkedIn. That's probably the other best place. That's, my super long form stuff goes on either my website, which is syndicated to my Substack as well. Slightly snappier, shorter, more, reacting to what's in the news today stuff is LinkedIn. But, just a forewarning, I try to not pull punches. I do try to challenge narratives in a constructive manner. I think you can legitimately argue I don't always achieve it in such a constructive manner, but I do try to, just kind of show people that there's other viewpoints and stuff out there. So that's a disclaimer. You can always unfollow. Please don't report me. I am on a final warning with LinkedIn. Nothing serious. Just happened to did an ice dip in Helsinki a couple of years ago, and the pic got flagged for nudity because I think you could see part of my chest on it. So the platform didn't like that. So yeah.
Well, keep challenging the norm. I think that's what we need more of. Just keep questioning and challenging. We're brilliant. Well, listen, thank you again, Jonny. And again, I'm sure listeners are really going to be interested in some of the points you've shared. And thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome. Thanks, guys.